Well, hello folks, and here we are in Module 8 of this course, and I want to share with you a few final important comments, and then also talk to you about some of the final things that are required here. So the first thing we're going to talk about is about sexual abuse, and this is a very difficult area for some people. They just don't even want to hear about it, but it is a practical reality in juvenile court. If you have anything to do with any kind of family law related cases, it was for a long time it was a kind of a hidden secret in our society that many people were sexually abused, but it was that thing that was never spoken of. But in more modern times, beginning in maybe the 70s, it started to become an issue that was brought out in the cold light of day, as it were. And the problem that you get into on this is that once something like this is put as a mark on a person, you never really get over it. So it's one of those things that we have to really be careful about. As you all know, and we've talked about before, that people get sometime a criminal charge against them, and then they're in a position they can never be around children again. They are put in a position where they're on some kind of a list, on the sheriff's list or something, and so you can just look in your neighborhood and see who in your neighborhood is a former child molester or some kind of a sex offender. One of the things I want to talk a little bit about this is that you often see the word pedophile used interchangeably with like child molester or sex offender. And these are three distinct things. It's important to keep this in mind. At least theoretically, according to some FBI articles that I've read, a pedophile can be an unconvicted person who likes to think about naked children. And so never done anything to any child or never done anything wrong. It's just something that they kind of have an interest in. So a pedophile is not necessarily convicted. Now a child molester, on the other hand, is a convicted person who has had some kind of a sexual involvement with a child. A sex offender, on the other hand, could have been a rapist, or any number of other things that don't involve children. This could be anything from indecent exposure up to some kind of a fondling charge, sexual battery, or rape. So in the child molesting, it's the same type thing. Someone's a convicted child molester. Well, there's at least 4 or 5 different categories of child molesting. Penetration is one, of course, and that's the worst kind. But then there's also anal sex, there's oral sex, there's fondling, and of course there's this exhibitionism. And then the final category is, of course, child pornography. And so some pedophiles get caught up in the child pornography aspect, but have never actually touched a child. There are even instances where people are charged as sex offenders who may have stumbled across some child pornography. One of the big things that is a concern nowadays is that, just what is child pornography? Because there are congressional laws on this, and there are state laws on this. And if it's a narrowly drawn statute, then one of the problems that you can get into is that you be careful about what you define as child pornography. So it's any kind of art, writing, or content that depicts a child in a state of undress, or in children having sex, for that example. You just described the great book by William Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. So you have to figure this out in terms of just what do we mean. So it's one of those things where we have to be careful about what our definitions are and just exactly what we're talking about. Well, in a more direct and more immediate problem in this class is the fact that all too often, and many statistical studies have shown, that if a parent was molested when the parent was a child, then the parent becomes a child molester in adult life. And then another thing is that victims of child molesting are much more likely to turn to a life of crime. And sometimes this is out of guilt, frustration, very low self-image. This is something that many of these cases have in common, is if there's a lack of self-image, people tend to resort to some kind of crime. And if you've been a victim of crime at a very early age, this can have an adverse effect on you for the rest of your life. So this is one of the areas that all too often children that are the victims of child molesting are the children of the victims of child molesting. So it has to be a very difficult thing. Some other issues I think that can enter in is lack of effective parenting. So you can have a boyfriend supposedly babysitting for the kids that's molesting the kids. You know, and if the parents are not really invested in the day-to-day activities of a child's life, you know, all too often a child can be found to be in a poor environment as far as being a potential victim for child molesting. A couple more quick comments on this, and that is that there are instances where you know, some people are all worried about, well, you shouldn't go into a public restroom because you're liable to be molested by some stranger. You know, child molesting by a stranger is like a 1 in a million type activity. If you just sit down and really closely read some of these sex offenders that are reported by these different sheriff's departments, the vast majority of them molested a relative. So there's like 1 million children molested every year by one of their friends or relatives or acquaintance, let's say someone that they know rather well. There's only about 3,000 cases a year of stranger molesting. So the bigger concern is picking your own friends as an adult, because your friends could actually be one of those people that could, you know, molest your children if you're not careful. One of the things on that is that I was sitting in the class one day and we brought this subject up, and I was a little shocked when a student raised her hand and said, I wanted to let you know that I was a victim of child molesting when I was about 7 years old. And here come to find out it was her father's best friend had been molesting her for about 3 years. Finally, the whole thing was found out. Obviously, the father was very upset. But the girl said, you know what, I've been in therapy since I was 10, I'm 20 now, and I am a very stable person, and I can talk about it without being upset. And so, just amazing. I mean, you want to talk about blowing the top off a class. I mean, I was not expecting this at all. But yet it was a very healthy exchange. It was a good class. Everyone involved, I think, learned something that day, including me. So this is a situation where child molesting does not have to ruin a child's life, but a child in that case does need therapy. And sometimes people who are financially strapped or unable to get that needed therapy can actually have worse outcomes for a child, because it's very important that you get the therapy in those kind of cases. So hey, I hope you've enjoyed this. I know it's a tough one to talk about. This is the end of the class. I guess we saved the worst for last. But it's been a joy, and enjoyed having you in the class. Always stay in touch if you have questions or problems. And thank you very much.